Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 12 of Maker's Mic, a music makers podcast presented by LR Bags. After an extended break, we're back, and it feels good. We had to take a little break over the holidays to work on some other projects. We just launched a new line of acoustic pedals, the Align series, and they're super sweet. 4 great pedals, the EQ, the Active DI, the Session, and the Reverb pedal. All very tasty. Make sure to check those out on our website. Also, we're going to be rolling out a ton of new video content here soon. Some great sessions from last year's Americana Fest. Artists like Tyler Childers, John Paul White, Lily Hyatt, and so many more. So be sure to look for those soon as well. Alright, so because of our long break, we've decided to call this Season 2 of Maker's Mic. It's still pretty much the exact same thing, just a different cast of characters and new stories. And man, have we got a good one for you today. Our guest this episode is Rock and Roll Hall of Famer and Songwriting Hall of Famer, Mr. John Oates. You probably know John as half of the legendary pop rock duo Hall & Oates. John just released a new record titled Arkansas. Recorded in Nashville with the Good Road Band, Arkansas is an homage album to the late, great Mississippi John Hurt and other early American roots musicians. Typically, I like to start off by diving into my guest's childhood and asking everyone about growing up. But I feel like we sort of covered that in our previous interview that's on our YouTube page. I love those stories about you starting off as an accordion player and your teacher, right. You were left-handed and your teacher didn't want to restring the guitar.
Right, or turn it upside down, that's right. So I ended up being a right-hand guitar player, a left-handed person in a right-handed guitar player's world.
Yeah, such good stories. What was some of the music that influenced you, like maybe in your high school days and sort of into college? Or
I had a really good friend his older brother went off to college in North Carolina, and when he came back from I think it was Christmas break, he came back with all these folk albums, and this would have been 1960 around there, I had been playing guitar now for 7-8 years at that point. Mm-hmm. So I could play, and I knew some chords, but I wasn't exposed. I was playing rock and roll and I was playing country music because, that was some of the earliest stuff I learned was simple 3-chord country songs. When he came back, I was amazed. He started playing these records by the Carter family, and it was even some of the more contemporary people at the time, Dave Van Ronk and Joan Baez, but also like Hetty West and the Weavers, and just on and on and on. I was amazed, and I was blown away, and it was like the world opened up to me. So I basically commandeered his record collection and began to drop the needle and listen and try to figure out what they were doing and how they were doing it. And little by little, I became a folkie. So all through the my early, like junior high and high school, I had a dual personality. I started in a band in 7th grade as well, playing rock and roll and R&B. But I was also, I like to joke that it's very similar to what I do now. Like, here in Nashville, I'm playing, Songwriters in the Round and playing acoustic guitar, playing a lot of traditional music and a lot of roots music. And then I put on my sharkskin suit and play the Hall & Oates show in a giant arena. So it's really just an exaggerated version of what I used to do when I was a kid, because I did the same thing. I played folk music and old little coffee houses and clubs back in the 60s, and then I played with my band. I'd play Stax and Volt and Wilson Pickett and all that kind of stuff. So it was really that's really who I am musically, is both sides of that world, those worlds.
Yeah, and it seems like you've always just been that way.
Yeah, it's just what you would. But I was fortunate to be able to, in Philadelphia, especially in the later in the 60s, when I moved to Philadelphia in 67, you had the Uptown Theater on North Broad Street, where I saw everybody, Otis Redding, Smokey Robinson, The Miracles, Temptations, James Brown. I saw Stevie Wonder play fingertips when he was 12. And then I had the Philadelphia Folk Festival, and my guitar teacher had people like Mississippi John Hurt, Doc Watson sleeping on his couch, and I would go there and I could learn directly from them. That was all happening at the same time. And so I had this incredible right place at the right time situation. So it was really an amazing time to be in Philadelphia.
Yeah. I feel like that's important, though, for musicians to just not be so focused on sort of one genre and influenced.
Yeah, I mean, being open to a lot of different styles and things only broadens your your scope, your technique, and I can play a lot of different kinds of music. I don't think I play any of them really well, but I can sure play a lot of styles.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
Right.
that's cool. Man, I gotta say, we've hung out a couple of times, and I don't think I've ever truly confessed my love for Hall & Oates.
Well, we'll keep that secret between you and I. All right? Don't worry, your secret's safe with me.
No, I'm proud. I'm a huge fan. Just indulge me for a second
Sure.
here. The music video for Out of Touch. Do you still have those pants? The white?
No. And if I did, I couldn't fit in them, I can tell you that. Well, that was Jeff Stein. I don't know if you know anything about Jeff Stein. Jeff Stein produced and directed that video. And he's the same guy who did the Tom Petty Alice in Wonderland style video.
Uh-huh.
So that was his thing, this psychedelic, kind of absurd, over-the-top, exaggerated, which was really, in a way, when you think about it, it was in keeping with the vibe of the 80s. Everything was larger than life, the big drum sounds, the reverse gate snare drums and all that overblown stuff that was so indicative of the 80s. That was the video, and that was his vision to do that video that way. And I tell you the truth, I mean, Daryl and I did not really think about our videos that much. And to our detriment, I think, in a lot of ways, because a lot of them were really stupid and silly. But we just weren't. We'd rather be musicians. We didn't really
wasn't
care
that
about
important
that
to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I had
but timing wise, I mean, it just lined up to where your rise to popularity
as a vehicle to promote ourselves and our music, it could not have been better. We were friends with the people who started MTV. And when they started MTV, they literally came to us and said, "We need content. We're going to start a music video channel." We're like, "What's a music video channel?" Because no one knew. There was no rules. There was no template for anything. So if you look at our first video, the Private Eyes video, we were at Studio Instrument Rentals in New York rehearsing for a tour. And at the end of the tour, literally as the tour bus was idling on the street waiting for us at about 1 in the morning when our last rehearsal was done, they came in and just put a black curtain behind us, and someone came in with these fedoras and trench coats.
Yeah.
And we put trench coats on and jumped around in front of the camera. And that was our music video because we didn't know what else to do. And we just wanted to get it out of the way so we can get on the bus and get on the road.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny to look back. And if you look at the Rolling Stones video from that same year, they did the exact same thing. It was a Stones video. It was just a black curtain and Mick Jagger jumping around in front of this, the thing.
They were just trying to get anything they could.
Well, no one, and then
started.
Of course, it went to the absurd level of the major productions with, things like Thriller and the Madonna videos and even our Out of Touch video.
Yeah. Reflecting back on the life that you've led, I mean, you've been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You've played at the White House for the president, not the current president. The one before.
I'm really glad we got to play for Obama.
Yeah.
He was a great audience.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah.
What, I mean, those are two really big pedestals to stand up on. What are some of your more cherished?
Oh, well, I think the Songwriters Hall of Fame to me is actually more important than all of those things, because I always say, well, if it wasn't for the songs, we would not be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We wouldn't have been playing at the White House. We wouldn't be selling out Madison Square Garden or whatever. So it's the songs, and to be honored as a songwriter, I think, is the ultimate, accolade for anybody who is a songwriter. To be included in this amazing pantheon of great songwriters that goes back to Cole Porter and George Gershwin and the Brill Building folks. And I mean, this is a heavy duty stuff. So if you're if you're mentioned in that same breath, then I think that's a big deal to me. So
yeah.
but there's been lots of moments. I mean, when we played the Apollo Theater with Eddie Kendrick and David Ruffin, who were the lead singers from the Temptations, who we idolized. Me and Daryl both idolized, separately and together. And actually, one of the first things I ever did with Daryl when I first met him was go to the Apollo to see the Temptations and sit in the audience.
Yeah.
So now we're on stage with the same guys doing those songs, and that was an amazing moment.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your new album, Arkansas. You were kind enough to gift me an advanced copy, and thank you for that. I really enjoyed it. It's a fantastic record. Would you want to talk about it and what the inspiration?
I would love to talk about it. I'm really proud of this record. It was a record that I actually didn't know I was going to make. I did not have this, kind of grand vision for this thing. I went into the studio in early 2016, and I recorded about 3 or 4 Mississippi John Hurt songs in the very traditional way with just me and an acoustic guitar. And one of which appears on the album, Spike Driver Blues, last track on the album. That's the only one that survived the initial sessions, because I just said to myself, well, it's been done before, and I'll never do it as well as the original, and why, kind of thing. But then I didn't want to abandon the songs because I love the songs so much. So I assembled this incredible band. I called in favors from a lot of my friends. I got Sam Bush, and I might as well name them all: Russ Paul on pedal steel, Nat Smith on cello, Guthrie Trapp on electric guitar, Steve Mackey on bass, and Josh Day on drums. And I assembled this eclectic band with a cello and a pedal steel and a mandolin. And I thought, let's see what happens. So from the very first track we cut, which was Stacko Lee, it was magic. And my engineer and co-producer, David Kalmusky, said, man, I don't know what this is, but just keep doing it because it's cool. And it gave a texture and a life to these songs that I never could have envisioned. But it was totally, if you strip away all those guys and all this amazing playing that they're doing, I'm playing the basic core traditional Mississippi John Hurt stuff. So we recorded about 5 of those of Mississippi John Hurt songs, and then I started to think, well, the album, it could be just a tribute to Mississippi John Hurt, but I started doing some research into his life, and I knew a lot about him, but I really got into it. And I found out, the first thing I found out was that he was a fan of Jimmie Rodgers. And I didn't know that, and I thought, wow, interesting. And I thought, what if I put a Jimmie Rodgers song on? So the album started to take on this it became like a snapshot of this unique era of the late 1920s when radio was just starting. Records were just being made and listened to at home for the first time. And I thought, well, that's kind of a seminal moment in music history because it's the beginning of popular music, American popular music. Because after all, American popular music is, if you hear it on the radio and you can play it on a record, that's it.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, well, we're getting to the source. And so I got into that. And I said, well, what was the first hit record? And I kind of did some research and found this song, Emmett Miller, song Anytime, was the first record to sell 1 million copies. I thought, okay, I've sold 1 million copies. What was the first one? And this is all stuff that was kind of happening in real time. And I thought, wow, okay, wait a minute, this is kind of cool. And then I added, and I started thinking about ragtime guitar playing, which is what Mississippi John Hurt really was doing. He wasn't really a Delta player. And Blind Blake's probably one of the foremost ragtime guitar pickers. And so I said, well, I'll do a Blind Blake song. And then all of a sudden the album took on a much richer kind of, as I said, snapshot of this unique time in American popular music.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing I love about the album. Aside from the songs, the inside jacket, each song, there's a little history lesson in there. And you just drop these names that, that I think really... It makes your listener. It made me want to say, "Well, who's that guy? I've never heard of this guy."
Right.
And so it.
Yeah. Well, I did that. I really wanted to do liner notes, which is really a real old time long playing album
Who
thing.
does that now?
Yeah. But I felt that this record, liner notes were appropriate. And the guy who co-wrote the book with me, Chris Epting, my book, he's a history guy. He's written history books, and he jumped on board. He said, "Man, let me write your liner notes," and did all this research. And it was cool because when I was a kid and I was reading those, like when I was talked about those folk albums that I discovered through my friend's brother. That's what I would do. I'd read the liner notes, and the liner notes always talked about the history of these songs and where they came from, and where how they evolved or whatever. And I thought this is the perfect album to do that. So I really wanted to give it that real vintage old time feel of this is a record that it has some history and behind it.
Yeah, and it seems like a preservation project of sorts. Like
I think there's a whole a lot of people aren't aware of music. Younger generation might not even consider music before the rock and roll era began. But there was music before rock and roll, obviously, and and some of that stuff led to the big band era, which then preceded rock and roll. In fact, in Emmett Miller's band, Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey were in his band.
Yeah.
And they went on to become huge, stars in the big band era with their own big bands. So that's how they got their start. So I see a continuum here, and that's what I was trying to do with the record.
Yeah, yeah. When did you discover Mississippi John Hurt? And
I saw him for the first time at the Philadelphia Folk Festival in 1963, I believe. It was either 63 or 64, I can't remember. But he made regular stops to Philadelphia. Philadelphia was one of his main places to play because the guy who was handling him as kind of a manager, this guy named Dick Waterman, was living in Philadelphia. And Bonnie Raitt was living with Dick Waterman for a while too. And that's one of the reasons that Bonnie Raitt's so darn good is that she got this stuff firsthand. She's the real deal. She's the real deal. So Dick Waterman was living on the street across from my guitar teacher, and so when a lot of these guys would come into town, he was he helped them get gigs at the coffee houses and the folk festival. They would either stay at Dick's house or they would stay at my guitar teacher Jerry Ricks's house, and so that's how I got to meet all these guys, and so it was an incredible time to be there. In fact, one day I remember me and Bonnie Raitt had to go find Robert Pete Williams. They couldn't find him. He had walked out of the house, and they knew he was in a bar, but they didn't know which bar he was in. Yeah. And we walked all over South Philadelphia, and we finally found him in a bar and dragged him back to Dick Waterman's house and dragged him up the steps. He literally couldn't walk. But these guys, you got to remember, they never left the rural areas of the South, and they didn't know what living in a northern city was like. They didn't have any money. Right. I remember stories of Doc Watson getting paid $50 to play a show. So $50 isn't going to cut it if you got to buy a hotel room and eat. This was a really unique, cool period of time.
Yeah, yeah. And since you brought it, tell us about that guitar.
Oh yeah. Well, when John Hurt died in '66, his guitar, he had a number of Guild guitars. If you see pictures of him, you'll see him playing about 2 or 3. Well, it's kind of a long, involved story. Do you have time?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Well, when he was rediscovered and was going to play his first show at Newport, he didn't really have a guitar, or if he did, it wasn't very good. And so the Newport Folk Festival people offered to buy him a guitar. So they took him to New York, and he went to a place called Fretted Instruments in Greenwich Village. And they told him he could pick anything he wanted. And they had Martins and Gibsons on the wall, and he didn't want to, he was real polite, and he didn't want to be greedy, so he didn't pick a really expensive guitar. And they were kind of shocked. They were like, well, don't you want a Martin?
Are you sure?
Yeah. And he picked a Guild F30, which was a really nice guitar, but not what you'd call a top-end guitar. But he liked it. That's what he picked. And so that was the guitar that he played at Newport. When he died in '66, that guitar was given to, because my guitar teacher, Jerry Ricks, who played with him and also would take him around, that guitar was given to my guitar teacher. So in 1972 and 73, when Daryl and I got our recording contract and we went up to New York to record for the first time the whole Oates album and the Abandoned Luncheonette album, I wanted Jerry to play on those records. So I asked Jerry if he'd come up to New York to play, and he said, do you want me to bring the John Hurt guitar? So I said, sure. So on the first two Hall & Oates albums, I'm playing Mississippi John Hurt's guitar.
That's cool.
Which I didn't think was such a big deal in those days because, it was the guitar. He had it in the house, and it was great.
Yeah.
So fast forward, Jerry Ricks went to Denver, Colorado in the mid-'70s. He was teaching guitar out there for a while, and he wanted to go to Europe. And he did go to Europe and never came back. But before he went to Europe, I guess he needed money. He sold it to the Denver Folklore Center. And this guy named Harry Tufts had it. And then subsequently it was sold to a guy named David Ferretta, who had it in his estate collection. And when David Ferretta died, the guitar was kind of entrusted to Harry Tufts to just keep. And this gal who she's a kind of she's my book club girl. She's like a researcher, and she read about me playing the guitar. She heard about the guitar in Denver, and she put us together.
Wow.
And I got a hold of Harry Tufts, who was also a friend of Jerry Ricks. Yeah. And I called him and I said, do you still have the Hurt guitar? And he goes, yeah. I said, I played that. Jerry let me play it. He went, man, he goes, you have to have this guitar. And I said, that's cool. I do. Yeah. And so I bought it from the estate, and now I have it, which is pretty incredible that I did an album based on that and then got the guitar. Now, my only regret is I didn't have it when I made the record.
Okay.
Which would have been almost too much, Yeah. I think my head would have blown off if that would have happened. But I got it right after I finished making the record. It was almost like a gift from God, It was it was almost like, wow, you made this record, now here's this guitar that I played and has such an incredible history. So now I have it, and I've actually just been invited to go back to Newport this summer and bring the guitar with me and play it.
Cool.
For the first time. So it's going to be pretty amazing experience to do that.
So let's see. I was going to ask you about the Good Road Band.
Yeah.
You've sort of already listed everyone off, but tell me about collaborating with them in the studio and what the recording process was like.
Ever since I recorded the first two albums with Daryl, we were fortunate enough to be produced by Arif Mardin, who, in my estimation, one of the greatest producers in the world. He produced everyone from, Aretha Franklin to Bette Midler to to the Rascals, to John Prine, to Laura Nyro. I mean, the guy was just a consummate musician and producer. And I run my sessions the way he ran his sessions. To me, he was the template for how to put a recording session together. And what I learned, one of the main principles I learned from him was that you surround yourself with great people and let them do what they do, and just guide the process. Just oversee the process, guide it, and not really, I'm not one of these guys who, tells everybody what to play, and, or else, there's no point, and that's what happened. I basically went into the studio every day. We cut one track a day, and I would sit there and play the song. Okay, guys, here it is. And they would take some notes, and we'd talk about it, and then we'd go out and play it. So everything on the record is exactly the way we played it. There's no overdubs. The only overdubs I did was I did a few on my vocal when I flubbed up the words or, whatever, because I was singing live.
Right.
So it was done, recorded on analog tape with all vintage gear. We mastered it on a 1960s lathe. We really did it up all the way. And it was designed as a vinyl record from the very beginning.
Yeah. It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Did the band members share your love of the genre, or did they have the knowledge, or was it something that was kind of new to them? Or
Sam knew most of the material because Sam's an old folky too, and he goes back. But the other guys, no, they didn't know it that well. Josh Day, our drummer and percussionist, he's from the same town where Doc Watson grew up, and he's been in Americana roots music for a long time, so he was aware of a lot of that stuff. Guthrie Trapp, of course, was aware of some of it. Russ Paul, who is an amazing, innovative pedal steel player, he He just, I don't know how much he knew of this music, but he can play anything, so it didn't matter.
Yeah.
And Nat Smith is just a cello genius, and he's from Mississippi, and he's a young guy, but he's got an old soul. So this really unique combination. And what I love about this band, and what people are of course going to be, when you hear it, you're dazzled by the musicianship and the virtuosity of the playing, which is pretty obvious when you hear it. But what I love about it is how they're listening to each other, because none of the solos were planned.
Okay.
They just did it. Like it was amazing. Like it was kind of, no one said, "Hey, you take a solo on this," or "I'll take a solo first and you'll follow me." It was just this really organic thing that happened. It's called great musicianship, where people are actually listening as well as playing. And when I hear the record, that's what I hear. I hear between the notes. I hear the space between the notes. Yeah. And I hear how they've listened to each other and how they're complementing the parts. And I think that's the best part of the record.
Yeah. That's amazing when you can get a group of guys together.
Yeah.
And I mean, it happens in this city.
Oh yeah. Well, there's great players in this town, and great players listen. That's one of the things. That's one of the marks of the trademarks of a great player.
And to be able to record a record like kind of just as a live session.
Just play
almost.
it. Yeah. Just play it. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. You've been out on the road a little bit since the record came out.
Yeah, we've been hitting it pretty hard. We started in late January. Played a bunch of shows. I think we've about 15 shows so far, and we've got only a few more to do before I put my Hall & Oates hat on, which is the next thing that's looming in the near future. So yeah, we've been playing small, medium-sized venues, and it's been great. The band just keeps getting better and better. I've done a few shows with the full band. Had everybody, but unfortunately, they're not always available. Sam has another job. He's got his own, the Sam Bush Band. Yeah. And Russ Paul just went out on a tour with Dan Auerbach. Okay. Nat Smith's on tour with Casey Musgraves. So I've got the core rhythm section. And Guthrie Trapp, Josh Day, and Steve Mackey, and the four of us have been playing together. And I wasn't sure how the record was going to translate with four guys, but it works just as well. It's actually in some ways even better because it's more open and there's more room to play. So it's a classic, two guitars, bass, and drums, and it sounds great. On a few dates, I've had Paul Franklin, the great Paul Franklin, come in on pedal steel and play with us. He played with us in L.A. and he's going to play with us on March 23rd at 3rd and Lindsley. Oh, cool. And that'll be the final show on this leg. And we'll go back out in the fall in September and October and do this again after the Hall & Oates tour is over.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Good reception from the crowd so far.
People seem to really love it. And every show we play, the audience gets a little larger, and the word's out. The word's out because the band is really good, and the people love it. And back in the old days when I was first starting playing solo shows, people kind of expected half of Hall & Oates. It's just natural, I think. Yeah. And a lot of requests for Kiss on My List and Rich Girl and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't happen anymore. I think people finally realize what I do separately from what I do with Daryl is a completely separate thing, and they come for that, which is really satisfying for me.
Yeah. That's cool. You're a car guy.
Yeah, I'm a car guy. I am. You want to talk cars? Don't get me started.
I mean, I can't talk cars with you. I'm not really a car guy, but tell me about some of them, some that you've had or loved and lost.
Well, ever since I've been a little kid, I had a friend who was he wasn't an exchange student. I'm sorry. He moved from England, came over when he was like 9th grade. I became friends with this kid, and his father had some English sports cars. And right when I got my license in 10th grade, he used to let me drive them. And I just had a love affair with small, light European sports cars. And eventually I started racing and doing things like that. And I used to collect cars in the 80s. In my pop heyday, I had a big vintage car collection. Luckily, I outgrew that. But now I basically have two cars.
There's worse things to be addicted to.
Yeah, but I learned my lesson because it's a full-time job. And unless you're somebody like Jay Leno and you've got like a staff of people to take care of these things, they require a lot of attention. Yeah. But I've got a 59 MG convertible that I drive around the Leapers Fork countryside, which I love. Yeah. And it's like going back in time for me. It's therapy. I drive it. I feel like I'm in another era. It smells of gasoline. It's loud. It's kind of loud and kind of, makes all these cool noises and smells like oil. And I drive slow in the country, and and it's beautiful. And I don't have a radio. It doesn't have a radio. It doesn't have a heater.
Yeah.
And it's pure driving, and it's great because that's what I love to do. And I'm building a 1959 Porsche as well. It's being built out in California, and that will be ready this spring.
Cool.
So
That's awesome.
yeah.
Do you have any good jokes?
Yes, I've got a couple. I got one. It's funny that came up just recently. I was talking to the folks from the Bluegrass Situation,
Mm-hmm.
and when I was at Bonnaroo a few years back, I was on a panel, and sitting right next to me was Ed Helms,
Yeah.
who is a banjo player, and
Yeah.
and being a comedian, I think it's very dangerous to try to tell a joke to a comedian, but I couldn't resist. So I told him my favorite banjo joke, which is, do you know why there's no banjos on Star Trek? You're supposed to say why?
Why? Yeah.
Because it's the future. And he chuckled. Let's put it that way. I got a chuckle out of him. He didn't exactly double over with laughter, but I think he liked it.
Oh, that's great. Give me some of your Deserted Island albums.
Wow.
You familiar with that
Yes.
concept?
I got this. I
Okay.
totally got this, and I'll tell you why. I have just finished reading the biography on the band called Across the Great Divide, and I've always been a huge band fan over the years. I love their records and love everything about them. And but boy, after reading the biography, I had an insight into the band and their playing, their personalities, and what they went through, and how they did what they did. So I went back and started revisiting a lot of the albums that I loved but hadn't listened to in a while, like Big Pink, and especially the second album, The Band,
Yeah.
which is the answer to your question, because that's the album. I would take two albums with me. I would take The Band, the Brown album, and I would take Joni Mitchell's Blue,
Okay.
which I think are two absolutely perfect records.
Yeah, I have both of those on vinyl.
I don't think there's not a flaw in those records. They're perfectly conceived, perfectly recorded, perfectly performed. Everything about them is perfect, in my humble estimation.
Great answer. Is there a band you listen to that might surprise people?
I'm a big fan of Bruno Mars.
Okay.
I think Bruno Mars is amazing.
He's killing it.
He's killing it.
Yeah.
I just saw his Apollo Theater TV special, which was amazing, and I've seen him. I haven't seen him live yet. I'm going to go see him eventually.
Oh, I bet he puts on an
he's
amazing
great.
show.
I'm a big fan of Anderson East. I love him. He feels like, to me, feels like kind of like a younger, new age version of Otis Redding.
Yeah.
In a way. I think what he's doing is real cool. I like all of David Cobb's stuff, and what David Cobb is doing as a producer, and his group and stable of artists. I think he's really onto some good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Margaret Price is great. Obviously Stapleton and Jason Isbell, they're all great.
Yeah.
Jim Lauderdale's a huge fan of Jim's and all the great records he makes. Buddy Miller, so on and so forth. There's so many people.
Yeah, that's cool. And last, is there a movie or a TV show that you've been thinking about lately? Not even the last thing you've seen, but just
Well, I've been binge watching stuff.
yeah.
Well,
Spill the beans.
I binge watched Ray Donovan. That was my wife and I binge watched that. That was really good. Can't wait for the next season of that. House of Cards, of course. And I just watched Icarus, which is just won an Academy Award as best short film, one of the best short films.
Yeah.
It's about the doping situation in the Olympics in Russia.
Right.
Unbelievable story. Unbelievable story. I just watched that last night. So yeah, we're on to the Netflix thing. We just grab stuff and start watching.
Instant access.
There's a lot of good stuff happening. I think TV is in a golden age right now. I think it's a real golden age of television, because the best stuff that's happening is on television.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. I think that about wraps it up. It's
Okay.
pretty painless.
No, man, that's good. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks so much, John.
Yeah. There's a faded glow along the great river road. Worn down farmhouse hanging on a broke down porch, looking over my and miles and miles. Walk along the levee, silhouetted by a crescent moon. When the sun starts rising, hitting 90 before the clock strikes noon. Don't you know the days and nights, dreams drift slowly by. Another Delta dawn, hope worth waiting on. Where that old man river flow, there's the snow white cotton fields of Arkansas here. There's a long black train running on a southbound track. Heed that distant whistle blowing when it calls you back to that hard-hit heartland along the muddy shore. Where that old man will flow, there's the snow-white cotton fields of Arkansas, yeah. Hope worth waiting for. New Delta dawn, folks round here been hoping for. Where that old man river flow, there's the snow white cotton fields of Arkansas, yeah. Oh yeah. Watch it, old man river flow. Watch it, old man river flow. There's the snow white cotton fields of Arkansas, yeah. Watch your old man river flow, old man river flow. There's snow white cotton fields of Arkansas, yeah. Watch your old man river flow, old man river flow. Snow white cotton fields of Arkansas, yeah. Watch your old man river flow, watch your old man river flow. There's a snow white cotton fields of Arkansas. Watch your old man river flow. Watch your old man river flow. Oh yeah. There's snow white cotton fields of Arkansas.
That was Arkansas by John Oates from his newest album, also titled Arkansas. That wraps it up for episode 12 of Maker's Mic. Thanks for keeping us afloat over our long break. Despite our absence, we were still receiving a great number of downloads per day. So thanks everyone for listening and sharing, and we'll catch you next time on Maker's Mic.